Howdy, everybody. I'm just going to give everybody a second to get settled, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right. So I'm going to have a little PowerPoint here going on the side at the same time as you can see me. And as I have written there, if you have any questions, just feel free to type them in the comments. And we can always meet in the group video chat after we wrap up. And I have a little section right here so you can kind of see where that is. It's in the little group video tab if you hit lobby and group video. So anyway, hi, my name is Ilia. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm coming to you from sunny Florida where the shirts are campy and the politicians are fascists, but don't worry. I'm here to offer solutions, not reiterate the same horrifying statistics that unfortunately surround my communities. Things about suicide rates, murder rates, homelessness, lack of access to basic health care, aggravated by waves of transphobic legislation led by the state from which I visit your homes. So we're going to skip past the setup and the formalities from the earlier parts in my poster, and we're going to focus instead on what I know from my work with and around the trans and non-binary community, and from my personal perspective as a non-binary trans person of color with extensive experience with healthcare obstacles. So hopefully some of this content will be new for you all and engaging and interesting. And again, you're welcome to type any questions as we go. I'll address them at the end. And I don't want you to feel obligated to focus on just the poster or the content I'm presenting either. I want you to consider this like an open invitation to ask things you're worried might get a negative response, because tensions are a little bit high at the moment, and us queer folks are dealing with a lot of trolls and attacks that kind of have us all in perpetual battle mode. So, and I'd also like to note that some questions aren't appropriate to ask strangers or colleagues or even friends. But in the interest of growth and learning, I want to completely suspend social conventions and put away even my own fears and personal boundaries and just be open and vulnerable with you and invite you to do the same. So really, any question is fine. And, you know, I won't take anything personally, and you're not going to get in trouble for asking anything in particular, because I know there's a lot of curiosity and maybe not great sources for answers, or a difficulty in ascertaining what's a correct answer and what's misinformation. And if we run out of time, again, feel free to meet me in the room that they have set up on the side afterwards. Okay, onward to results, the little purple box. All right, so here we go, purple box. I want to talk about precise and life-saving, because the human decency, respect stuff should be a given. And if it isn't, I really can't help with that anyway. So just look at the picture of this gentleman here, and I want you to consider this case study, and it is true. This guy walks into the ER with a fever and excruciating pelvic pain. He says the pain has been increasing on and off for the past few years, and that doctors have checked him repeatedly and said things were okay. Assuming the intake form looks like most, there's going to be a section that says either sex or gender. And well, I'm going to skip to the end. He had to have a total hysterectomy because his reproductive system had atrophied after taking testosterone for 15 years, fusing his uterus, cervix, and ovaries. His gynos missed it too, by the way. For anyone unfamiliar, this is Buck Angel. He is a trans male porn star, and this did actually happen to him. So I just want to circle back to that intake form and zoom in on the whole application is easy portion. And I want you to think about what would have been the right response to sex on Buck's intake form. It's kind of a trap, right? There's no correct answer when the question in itself is inherently flawed. Whether he puts male or female, we're not going to have a full picture. Okay, so the doctors are not going to have all the information that they need to have a correct diagnosis. And I also want you to think about, how does having limited exclusionary language affect a trans patient? Well, you know, for Buck Angel, he's literally a porn star, so that is the least shy person you could ask for. He's probably not going to be so reticent to talk about it. But think of almost anybody else. Already by the fact that you only give one option, the person sitting there looking at that form, and they've looked at it 1,000 times and thought it 1,000 times, what am I supposed to put here? That already is kind of like you shut down a little bit inside, and you're not going to have a really great path forward. You want to have open communication with your doctor and between doctor and patient. So let's go to the next one here. That kind of brings to the next question: why sex assigned birth and not sex? Well, so a lot of times sex assigned at birth, that's going to be determined mostly by genitalia, sometimes chromosomes. And in most states, since it's still limited to male and female only, that excludes a lot of intersex people, which can be anywhere from like 0.5 to 1.7% of the population. And likewise, by putting it as sex only, it kind of gives a sense that like we've already figured that out. These are the options. Science says so, the end. And that's not really the case. We want to add the possibility for human error and also error of our methodologies in evaluating and assessing that. So by putting sex assigned at birth, that already sort of softens it and allows for a dialogue, be like, what does this mean? You know? And then for patients where that might require some clarity, you're going to already start that conversation. And then as for why sex and gender, well, a lot of times the two are conflated in forms. I actually went to donate some blood yesterday at the Big Red Bus, and in the intake form, which pet peeve every single time, they always put gender, and it's like, you don't know what the word gender means. Sex offers broad preliminary insights into risk factors, endocrine functions, typical structures to establish baselines, right? And gender, on the other hand, reflects the internal identity of the person, and it's not always apparent, just like you saw that picture of Buck Angel. Would you have known? Probably not. Well, unless your interests on the internet are what they are, but you wouldn't have known necessarily. So you don't really want to make assumptions or assume that there's going to be a match between the two, because you honestly can't necessarily tell. By distinguishing these as separate, physicians are going to avoid confusion, discomfort, possible misdiagnosis, as well as improve necessary communication. Now, I didn't add this section to my poster, but here's some really, really basic essential terminology I wanted to review with you. And I do urge you to go to that website, translanguageprimer.com. My friend Grayson made that. It is trans-made. It's very accurate. It's constantly getting updates. It's an excellent resource. And if you do use it, please consider donating to them, because they've done this work almost single-handedly. So anyway, AMAB, AFAB, assigned male or female at birth. So a lot of times this language can feel really clunky and onerous and like, oh gosh, I have to use a paragraph to describe something that I think should be done quickly. No, not necessarily. You can shorten it there. So that gives you a sense of sex assigned at birth. Also, as for non-binary or NB, you might hear sometimes, that just basically means not identifying with the male, female gender binary. So for example, I'm not non-binary. I don't identify as male. I don't identify as female. And this is sort of an umbrella term. So it includes, but is not limited to genderqueer, gender fluid, two-spirit, and many, many other identities. I'm not a huge fan of honorifics, but if you're looking for a gender neutral one to use instead of Mr. or Miss or Mrs., this is mix. And it's kind of a newish term, and it's pronounced mix. It's MX. I think is a lot of fun. So if you're looking for something to be formal with your patient and they use they, them pronouns, you're going to want to use mix for that. And also just a quick note on transgender and trans. So that basically means it's identifying as a gender other than that assigned at birth. This includes non-binary people. Not all of non-binary people wish to self-identify as trans. It's not my job or anybody's job to gatekeep that. But I will say, just my personal 2 cents, it does feel like a little internalized transphobia to say like, oh, that's not me, I'm not trans. Well, if you were assigned male or female at birth and you don't identify as either male or female, that does kind of fall under the definition of what trans is. But once again, we're not in the business of gatekeeping, so that's all right. No big deal. Not all trans people wish to medically transition hormonally or surgically. So that's just something to keep in mind. They might be interested. They might not be. They might be interested, but oftentimes not have the economic resources or healthcare to be able to do that. And insurance is a nightmare about that stuff. So that doesn't negate their identity or make them less trans. And it's yet another reason why you can't really assume based on how a person looks. There are a lot of factors that go into that. Okay, so you messed up. Now what? progress over perfection. Don't be weird. I really can't emphasize that enough. Don't be weird. When inevitably you get something wrong, the most important thing is to just hear the person out and, don't get defensive about it. Take the correction and move on quickly. Sometimes they're not going to make that correction, but you'll notice like, oh, I messed up. Just try to self-correct and don't make a big deal about it when it happens. The best thing is that the more you practice it, the fewer mistakes you're going to make. And I say fewer mistakes because you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. My wife makes mistakes when talking about me. It's normal. It's fine. It's no big deal. Humans aren't perfect. Just don't make it weird. That's all. Don't make it weird. There's a little section here in Spanish. I'm actually not going to go over it because I don't know how many of you necessarily speak Spanish, and I don't want to turn it into a grammar thing. I love grammar. I think it's so much fun. I'm also socially aware enough to know that I'm probably the only person who feels that way. So I'm not going to burden you with that. But if you are interested in it, I just want you to talk to the BCPH Academy, and I would be happy to offer a crash course on that. Speaking of which, I do plan to teach some more in-depth trans-related content soon. So definitely stay tuned and look for that class and sign up and get your friends to sign up when it pops up. And as always, I'm going to try to be an open book and create a safe space for you to ask questions that might otherwise be problematic in other spaces, because, it's in the interest of us sharing and learning and making society equitable. And I'd rather you ask me than to ask the internet, because that can yield really mixed results. So again, I know it's a lot of touchy subjects, but I just want to promise you that you are safe to ask me whatever you need to ask that you're wondering about, whether or not it's directly related to this content. So with that in mind, that wraps it up. I am a fast talker, but again, when I teach my class, I will slow down because I'll have more than 10 minutes to talk about it. So thank you so much for listening and making life better for people like me. I really appreciate you all being here. And with that, I'm going to see if there are any questions. And if there aren't, let's see. Oh, you have some questions. Okay, I see Candace has some questions. Yeah, feel free. Oh, you can't see it. No, she couldn't see the poster.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, I can see you there. Yes, questions. Go ahead.
Awesome. I have questions. So, and I'm not sure if this is too broad or not, but I'll anyway. The first one is, how, from your perspective, how can we incorporate a lot of what inclusive language and then the clinical medical implications it can have for patients, and incorporate that into the medical curriculum, and then also for medical students, as well as training of physicians who are well past medical school? Question number one. And then question number two, do you know what percentage of trans individuals have actually done the hormonal and surgical transition versus those that kind of interesting, but I'm not sure if you know that either. So.
Okay, let me try to get to the first thing, then I'm probably going to have to ask you to repeat the second thing. So actually, it's not so difficult to be able to integrate this stuff into your medical intake forms and into the office. It can be as simple as just, adding what I said about putting sex assigned at birth and then gender. And you can even put like boxes there and then have room for an other box, which I know can become a little unwieldy, but just under sex assigned at birth, you can put as simple as like M, F, and then I/other explain. So for intersex or other. And there are more states starting to add additional categories. So that's helpful. And then under gender, the reason I put that is because more for the sake of creating like almost like a little flag to say, okay, if the sex and the gender don't match, there is a possibility that there may be hormones involved, that there may be, surgery involved or whatever. And then by adding pronouns, that's just a basic courtesy thing. And as far as the courtesy thing goes, it's not just a matter of like being polite and everything. We tend to think of, just because of the way it's framed in society, that like, a trans identity is something that's in your head, Well, I mean, like, what is the doctor label? Well, the doctor label is a certificate that you got based on knowledge that you acquired. Where does that knowledge live? In your head. Just because you have a piece of paper attesting to that fact, it doesn't make it any different than anything else, in that it is an internal identity based on your knowledge that you've acquired of yourself and the outside world. So for the sake of mutually respecting one another and saying, well, I assume that you are a doctor when you tell me you're a doctor, in the same way that you assume I'm a whatever based on the fact that I tell you I'm a whatever. So that's one way to sort of make that language inclusive. And one of the things I underlined was to make sure to practice this behind people's backs as well, because otherwise it's not going to really hold up and the respect isn't there. Sure, the person might not be there to hear you call them, you know, him or her when they might not identify that way, but that's going to make it more likely for you to make that mistake. And likewise, even within the offices, you want to implement that language with staff, with doctors, with everybody else. One simple way you can help with that is if you use name tags, just to have the pronouns underneath. That normalizes it. And when I say normalizing, I don't just mean for trans people or they, them people, because that continues to other. So for cisgender people as well, you want to have that pronoun thing there that signals to everybody that it's a kind of safe, inclusive space and makes it not such a weird, awkward thing. As far as percentages of people taking hormones or have undergone therapy, I'm not sure what those numbers are, but I can tell you that a lot of the medical transition, if and when a person pursues them, it's not always going to be above board, meaning because there's a lot of lack of access, and that's decreasing even more as there's legislation showing up. There are going to be a lot of places and situations where people get the drugs, you know, illegally or what have you, for any number of reasons. So I think even if we were to look at statistics of how common it is, it may or may not be, you know, up to date. And as far as number of people identifying as trans or non-binary, even those numbers are constantly shifting. And one of the things I saw that is a really good analogy for this is that, you know, until recently, people did not say they were left-handed for a really long time, partly because they were told you have to be right-handed. But once people were like, hey, it's okay to be left-handed, here are some scissors, here are some desks and whatnot, everyone was like, oh my God, this is me, I'm left-handed. It's not that all of a sudden, like, well, you've normalized being left-handed and now it's a trend and now everybody wants to be left-handed. Literally, no, it's not that at all. It's that now that it's acceptable in some places, in some circles, you're going to start seeing people, you know, you're going to see numbers of people who identify as trans and non-binary going up. That's not a trend. It's not an invented thing. It's just that, you know, before it was illegal and maybe again, and now it's not. So as far as numbers, it's hard to get a really good handle on that. Can you ask again what the other thing was, or did you want to go to the other room since I'm over time?
I think you actually did answer it, because it was what percentage of people are taking hormones versus not. But it's so incredibly intriguing that you mentioned basically a black market for these sorts of things. And so we can't even really appreciate the extent that this is actually happening. So love that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I could just tell you, for example, like, well, if you go to the trans language primer, there's a whole section tab on medical stuff that is pretty interesting. And again, medical transition can include many different things. But for example, testosterone, that is a street drug as well. So like performers, you know, the whole roids thing, you can definitely get that if you want on the street. And likewise, you know, for trans women, birth control pills, that's not really particularly hard to get. So, you know, there are many different ways to go about it. And of course that affects it. And I saw someone, you know, would comment, not interesting for me. In my opinion, it creates big conflict in most of the country. It doesn't matter if there's conflict or not. At the end of the day, if your job is to be a doctor, this information is life threatening or life-saving, depending on how you do it. Because as I said, with the case of Buck Angel, for example, what kind of diagnosis could we have expected if someone had made assumptions about who he was? And likewise, you know, you have someone coming into an office for screening, like let's say you have someone that is a trans man, once again, you know, what are you going to be looking at for them? Well, you're not going to need, you know, to look for testicular cancer or prostate cancer. That's going to be a total waste of time. You might need to look possibly for cervical cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer. You might want to check liver enzymes because testosterone can be really damaging to the liver. So whether or not you like it or you're comfortable with the language or not, it doesn't matter what people are comfortable with or not. The opinion doesn't matter. What matters is serving patients. So you want to be absolutely sure to get the most complete picture. All right. Well, anything else?
You know, as I'm listening to you, and other presenters today, I'm just always reminded about why we have these sessions and why we started BCPH. And cannot thank you enough for just this incredible presentation. And I do hope you go over to the participant networking booth so you can engage and look forward to hearing your future research. I know you said you weren't a researcher, and I'm like, what is she talking about? You're definitely among your folks, you know, on this research platform today. So thank you again, and look forward to hearing from you. And I have to stop broadcasting so we can go on to the next booth, but take care. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. I appreciate it.